So imagine billions of dollars being wired across the globe in just a matter of seconds.
Right.
And at the same time, you've got warships mobilizing in the Middle East, supply chains are scrambling to adapt, and, sweeping technology regulations are being drafted by politicians in the US and Europe.
It sounds like a lot.
Exactly. Now imagine all of that happening in just a single week, and the world actually standing completely still.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating stack of sources, specifically focusing on the MGF Weekly Report 26W15.
Which covers the week of April 6th to April 12th, 2026.
Right, that specific week. And if you just looked at the surface, you would think this was a week of massive, world-altering upheaval.
Well, it is the absolute definition of mistaking activity for progress.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on that right out of the gate.
Sure.
Because, how can you say nothing's shifted? We are talking about real geopolitical conflicts here. We are talking about literal billions of dollars moving into tech infrastructure, massive legislative battles.
I know.
It just feels completely disconnected from reality to say, nothing happened when there are physical ships and physical money moving around the globe.
I completely understand the discomfort there. I mean, it feels entirely counterintuitive to watch the news and conclude that the world hasn't actually changed.
Right, because it looks chaotic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to understand why the MGF report makes this claim, we have to use the analytical lens provided by the source documents. It's a framework called the LMOS framework.
Now that stands for?
Layered Mechanics and Operational Structure.
Got it. Layered mechanics and operational structure.
Right. And what this framework does is force us to look past all the loud impressions. The headlines, the outrage, the excitement.
The stuff that gets the clicks.
Exactly. We look past that and observe three very specific things instead.
Yeah.
Structure, phase, and gradients.
Okay.
Now, actually, before we go further, I want to be very clear for our listeners. We are not taking sides on any of the geopolitical or political issues mentioned in these sources today.
Yes, absolutely. That's an important point.
Whether it's U.S. policy, European regulations, or Middle Eastern conflicts, we are just looking impartially at the mechanics of these events, exactly as they're described in the report.
So we're essentially looking at the engine of the world, not arguing about who is driving the car or what their bumper sticker says.
That is exactly the goal.
Yeah.
And from a mechanical standpoint, the LMOS framework operates on this core rule, which is structure over impression.
Structure over impression. Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
It means an update to the world isn't a loud headline. An actual structural update is a change in the fundamental rules of the game.
Right.
And right now, despite all that noise you mentioned earlier, the fundamental rules haven't changed. High-intensity events are occurring, definitely, but they're failing to connect to actual structural change.
Well, let's ground that in reality for a second, because if a major shipping conglomerate permanently reroutes its entire fleet around Africa instead of going through the Strait of Hormuz due to tension, they physically change their route. That costs millions of dollars. How is that not a structural update?
Because that rerouting hasn't resolved into a new formalized system.
Wait, what do you mean by formalized?
Think about the tensions in the Middle East during this specific week. There are high-intensity events happening, right?
Right.
But those events haven't resolved into a new structure of either outright regional war or a formalized peace treaty.
Oh, I see.
The global shipping industry hasn't completely abandoned the old routes, nor have they secured them. Instead, according to the report, they have stabilized into what is called a probabilistic fluctuation.
A probabilistic fluctuation. But, hasn't international shipping always involved some level of risk? Storms happen, piracy happens. Why is this week's report claiming this is a fundamentally new structure?
Well, risk is a known variable. You can insure against risk with standard models.
Right, actuaries do that all day.
Exactly. But a probabilistic fluctuation means the instability itself has become the baseline state. It defies standard actuarial math. It's this ongoing unstable holding pattern. Shipping companies don't know week to week if a route is open or closed. So maritime insurance syndicates don't know how to price the premiums.
So the cost of moving a container just becomes a dice roll?
Yes, it's not a new solid direction. It's just tension.
Okay, so it's like, tell me if this analogy works. It's like A car engine revving incredibly loudly while the transmission is just stuck in neutral.
That's a great way to look at it.
Like, there's a ton of noise, the machine is physically vibrating, you can smell the burning fuel, but the car itself hasn't moved an inch forward or backward.
Yes. And what happens to a car when you redline it in neutral for too long?
It overheats, it breaks down.
Exactly. It overheats. The report calls this phenomenon unrectified differences.
Unrectified differences.
Right. The pressure is building up. Political pressure, economic pressure, logistical pressure. But because there is no structural update, that pressure isn't being processed or resolved.
It's just accumulating inside the engine block. Man, okay. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of why the transmission is stuck in neutral in the first place.
Right.
And the source material maps the world out using 3 distinct layers to explain this massive disconnect. Let's walk through those layers because I think this is where the framework becomes incredibly useful for understanding like everything from tech to politics.
Yeah, the 3 layers are crucial. They are the narrative layer, or N layer.
The N layer, okay.
The interests layer, or I layer.
Got it.
And the operational system layer, the OS layer.
N, I, and OS.
Right. Now, normally, these layers work together to create progress.
Yeah.
But right now,
yeah,
they are completely asynchronous.
Okay, let's use artificial intelligence as the lens for this first, because the report leans pretty heavily into AI infrastructure. I mean, it's the biggest investment story of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And what's fascinating here is how wildly out of sync these 3 layers are when it comes to AI.
Walk me through it.
So first, you have the narrative layer, the N layer. This is the story we tell ourselves. It's the headlines, the grand announcements from tech CEOs.
Right.
In the N layer, AI is sold as this limitless, high-speed software growth driver. It's magic code in the cloud that will instantly revolutionize the global economy.
It's treated as completely weightless. Like, the story is that it's just algorithms, pure intelligence, constrained only by, I don't know, the imagination of the developers.
Exactly. But then you drop down one level to the interests layer, the I layer.
Which is about what, exactly?
It's about motives and capital. Here, we see massive amounts of global capital rushing in to secure an early advantage. The motive is pure FOMO, fear of missing out.
Oh, yeah, the gold rush.
Hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, massive tech conglomerates. They're throwing billions at AI because their primary interest is simply not being left behind in what they perceive as the next industrial revolution.
Which makes logical sense, honestly, if you believe the N layer. If it really is a weightless magic bullet that prints money, you want to buy as much of it as possible, as fast as humanly possible.
Yes, exactly. But then you hit the bottom layer.
The OS layer.
The OS layer. The operational system. This is physical reality, the actual literal ground we walk on.
And AI suddenly gets very heavy down there.
Yes. In the OS layer, AI is not a soft, weightless industry at all. It has suddenly become a heavy infrastructure industry.
Because of the computing power required?
Right. To run those magic algorithms, you need massive data centers. And those data centers are entirely bottlenecked by physical constraints. The local power grid, the local water supply for cooling, physical land.
And the permits.
Oh, yes. The incredibly slow process of getting municipal building permits.
I really want to dig into those physical constraints because I think that's where the illusion totally breaks down. You know, a hedge fund in New York runs the math in the I layer and decides, hey, we need to build a 2-gigawatt data center right now to train this new model.
And the ROI is undeniable on paper.
Right. The math on the spreadsheet is completely flawless.
The math says build immediately. The global financial system operates at the speed of fiber optic cables. But the reality is they want to build that data center in a region where, say, the local power grid hasn't been upgraded since the 1980s.
Oh, man.
A 2-gigawatt facility requires specialized electrical transformers that currently have a 3-year manufacturing backlog.
3 years?
Yeah. It requires millions of gallons of water for cooling, but the local water table might already be stressed from drought. And before you can even pour the concrete, you have to go through local town hall meetings, environmental impact reviews.
So the concrete and the copper wire are moving at the speed of local bureaucracy.
Exactly.
While the money is literally moving at the speed of light.
And the sources term this the velocity mismatch.
Velocity mismatch. That is such a good term.
You have a global financial layer slamming face first into physical energy and shipping logistics, which move very, very slowly. The 3 layers are completely asynchronous.
The report specifically calls out a compatibility error occurring because of this, right?
Yes.
It's the clash between the hyper-fast global logic of financial optimization and the incredibly slow local reality of a physical environment. I mean, you literally cannot force a municipal water board to move at the speed of venture capital.
You really can't. And because the financial OS cannot force the physical OS to move faster than the laws of physics and local zoning laws allow, the energy has nowhere to go. The system is just stalled.
Yeah, and this doesn't just apply to tech and data centers, though. The report explicitly highlights stalled political and policy negotiations across the U.S. and Europe this week, too.
It does, yeah.
Which surprised me. I was surprised to see legislation treated the exact same way as a concrete data center.
But it's the exact same LMOS mechanic. Look at the sweeping tech regulations or green energy policies currently gridlocked in the U.S. and the EU. The narrative layer, the politicians giving speeches, demands immediate, historic regulatory oversight.
Right. The N layer says we are going to control AI, or we are going to mandate a green transition.
Meanwhile, the interests layer, the lobbyists, the corporate PACs, the advocacy groups, is spending millions of dollars trying to shape or block those laws based on their own motives.
So there's a flurry of high-speed, high-intensity activity in Washington and Brussels.
Exactly. But when you drop down to the OS layer of policy, which consists of the actual bureaucratic agencies, the legacy legal codes, the enforcement mechanisms,
Another compatibility error.
a massive one. The regulatory agencies tasked with monitoring these hyper-advanced AI models don't even have the technical infrastructure or the legal jurisdiction to do so.
Right. You can't just pass a law and magically make it work.
A sweeping legislative mandate cannot magically upgrade the technical competence of a decades-old administrative agency overnight.
So the politicians announce a grand plan, the lobbyists fight over all the details, but the actual administrative gears that would enforce the law are just totally jammed.
Yes, the legislation stalls in committee, or it gets tied up in years of court battles over jurisdiction. It is another unrectified difference. The N layer screams progress, the I layer throws money at it, but the OS layer remains totally unupdated.
Okay, so if I'm waking up on a Tuesday morning, right, and the global engine is revving but nothing is moving, whether it's AI infrastructure, international shipping, or U.S. and European policy, how does that actually manifest in my life?
That's the real question.
Because when I read this, my first thought was, if there's this much friction in the system, why aren't we seeing massive dramatic market crashes? Why aren't supply chains totally imploding overnight?
And that is actually the most insidious part of this specific moment in time. The framework introduces two concepts here to explain that: calcification and silent heat.
Calcification, meaning things are hardening, becoming rigid.
Yeah. The report notes that markets and society are oddly numb right now. Given the level of geopolitical tension in the Middle East, the massive friction in tech infrastructure, the legislative gridlock areas that should be reacting wildly are relatively quiet.
Right. There's no widespread panic in the financial markets.
Because investors are assuming the N-layer narrative will simply overwrite physical reality eventually. The system is calcified. It refuses to acknowledge the bottleneck.
But the friction isn't vanishing. It's just being absorbed by the system.
Exactly. We are in what the analysts call Phase S3.
Phase S3.
It's a wear and tear phase. It is the heavy friction phase that occurs just before a major phase transition or a system snap. And because the heat of this friction isn't dissipating through a massive market correction or a clear geopolitical resolution, it's accumulating internally.
And that is the silent heat.
That is silent heat.
Let me make sure I'm really grasping this S3 phase wear and tear concept, because I think it's the most relatable part of this entire deep dive for the listener.
Go for it.
Imagine you work at a mid-sized company and upper management, which would be the narrative and interest layers, announces a massive new software initiative. They promise the shareholders it's going to double revenue in 6 months. They throw a huge budget at it.
The engine is revving.
Right, exactly. But you, down in the IT department, you're the OS layer. You know that the legacy servers literally cannot handle the processing load of the new software. It is physically impossible.
But management won't listen.
No, management won't listen. The stock price is soaring based on the narrative, but you are just sitting down in the server room watching the internal temperatures rise.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Management is looking at the stock price and thinking everything is fine because the market is calcified. But the heat is absolutely building in the server room.
And the friction doesn't show up as the company immediately going bankrupt on day one.
Whoa.
It shows up as the servers crashing for an hour every day. It shows up as the IT employees burning out and quitting quietly one by one. It's slow wear and tear.
Yes. The gap between the fast narrative and the slow reality doesn't resolve in a single cinematic crisis.
So taking that out of the server room and back to the global economy, phase S3 doesn't look like empty grocery store shelves.
No, it doesn't.
It looks like the price of the things on those shelves creeping up by another 3% and then another 2% just to cover the skyrocketing maritime insurance premiums in the Middle East.
Exactly. It looks like your package delivery, which used to take 2 days guaranteed, now taking 5 days. And the tracking information simply says delayed.
And everyone just accepts that delays are the new normal standard.
Right. It's a suspension of judgment. The report describes it almost as the slow, quiet shaving away of your freedom of choice.
It's basically the death of just-in-time delivery.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly what it feels like to live in a world that has transitioned to probabilistic logistics.
There's that word again, probabilistic.
Right. For the last 30 years, global supply chains and daily life were built on deterministic logistics. You order a specialized manufacturing part from overseas, it arrives Tuesday at 9 a.m., you build your product at 10 a.m. You could rely on certainty.
But now, because of that velocity mismatch, the fast money demanding things that the slow, bottlenecked physical worlds can't deliver, coupled with all the unresolved geopolitical tension certainty, is just gone.
It is.
I can't guarantee the part arrives Tuesday because, well, I don't know if the shipping container had to reroute around Africa or if the port had a power failure because the local grid was totally overwhelmed by a new data center.
Exactly. Urban design, corporate strategy, even your own personal daily routines. They all have to be redesigned with uncertainty as the baseline assumption now. You can no longer optimize for perfect efficiency.
You have to optimize for resilience.
Because the operational system layer, the OS layer of ships, power grids, and administrative bureaucracies, is completely bogged down by unrectified differences.
But if this wear and tear is constantly building in the global server room, as you say, I mean, physics dictates that it can't just build forever.
No, it can't.
A company can only lose so many IT workers before the whole network goes down. Something has to give.
Which is exactly why the source material doesn't offer a neat, tidy resolution here.
Right.
It adheres to a calm, structural approach. Instead of trying to predict the exact future, the LMOS framework looks at what they call the next gradient. It forces us to ask, how long can these silent areas hold?
That's at the breaking point.
Right. What will be the trigger that finally forces the physical OS layer to snap? Because the framework suggests it'll be the physical layer that breaks first.
Not the narrative.
No, it won't be a narrative shift or a sudden change of heart by a tech CEO. It will be a local power grid physically buckling under the weight of a new AI data center, causing rolling blackouts across a major metropolitan area.
Oh, man.
Or it will be a major shipping route becoming entirely uninsurable because the probabilistic fluctuation of conflict finally tips over the mathematical edge for actuaries.
Which would force trade to halt entirely rather than just delay it. Or it's a massive legislative package collapsing entirely because the administrative agencies physically lack the personnel to audit the tech companies they are supposed to be regulating.
Yes. What will be the trigger that forces a real structural update? It happens when the OS layer finally forces the narrative and interest layers to acknowledge reality.
Wow, that is a heavy thought. Because we spend so much of our time arguing about the narrative layer.
We really do.
We argue about the news, the political speeches, the grand announcements from corporations. We get swept up in the speed and the excitement of the interest layer. But we completely ignore the OS layer until the lights literally go out.
Because the OS layer is boring.
Yeah.
It's concrete, it's electrical transformers, it's maritime insurance law, it's bureaucratic procedure. But as the LMOS framework shows us, the OS layer is what ultimately dictates reality. It is the bottleneck that restrains every single high-level decision being made today.
I really want you, the listener, to take this framework and apply it outside of just the global news we covered today. Look at your own industry. Look at your own projects or even your own household routines.
Yeah.
Stop looking at the loud events. Stop looking at the surface-level arguments at your office or in your community. Ask yourself, where is the friction accumulating silently?
Where is the velocity mismatch in your own life?
Exactly. What is the slow reality in your world that the fast narrative is completely ignoring? Because in a world that is moving away from certainty and becoming entirely probabilistic, where you place your bets matters more than ever.
That's very true.
Are you betting your time and resources on the narrative? Or are you actually paying attention to the operational system? Are you just listening to the roar of the engine, or are you noticing that the car is still stuck in neutral?
The heat is silent, but it is building.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes on the structure, not the impression. We'll see you next time.